When I was 8 years old, my grandmother's best friend had gathered a bunch of her friends to have coffee and chisme. It was a favorite pastime for a group of women born before any of us could even vote. My mother entered the room to tell my grandmother she had arrived to drive her back. Her friend smiled and said, "Hey, you're always so weird." My grandmother laughed. My mother did not, and I ate cookies. The ride back home was awkward because my mother did what she always did, to later define herself as brave. She stayed quiet. If there was one thing the women in my family had in common, it was their ability to be absolutely terrifying over things like how to make a bed, but very quiet over the women they found in it with their husband, or in my dad's case, the men. I hated that hypocrisy, in part because people that live to lie to themselves that they are good will never acknowledge if they treat you bad. We were driving back home, and my mother's oldest friend was in the back. Both of them were scolding me, which really rubbed me the wrong way. My chihuahua was in my hand, and like his mother, was also the center of an imagined scandal by my mother. We were at a restaurant that allowed him to enter, and a lady stepped on his tail. Frightened, he barked at her, and she reported it to the manager. Luckily, it all ended, and Karen got her vampiric moment of the day, able to return to her open-toed coffin with glee that somehow someone got in trouble for her mistake. Personally, I was happy. The dust settled, no one got hurt, and we could move on. "You gotta train that dog," my mother's friend declared. "You have to, or they will remove him." "Who?" I asked. "The people that remove wild dogs," she said in a most serious tone. The irony of my mother's friendship with Gigi is that they both thought each other incredibly stupid. Gigi reminded my mother of my grandmother, irrationally difficult and demanding, but somehow deeply informed over things like wild dog removals from a group she could only title as they. My mother chimed in because if there was someone setting up my grave, my mother was going to show up with flowers. It was the biggest discrepancy of our relationship, my mother's demand for me to be blindingly loyal to her, especially when she was mean to someone, while she used her PhD to support Gigi's theory of wild dog removals by a group called They. "I told her he's crazy," my mother said while driving through the peaks and valleys of Ponce. As I looked outside the window, I yearned to be jumping off of one of them. "He does not behave," she continued, as I glanced at the woman whose own legs became his sleep mattress. Was Gigi napping on her lap as well? Was this the root of her big, massive loyalty to her? "Would someone like to pay for training?" I said, knowing I would trigger the Puerto Rican choir. "Whoa! ¿Qué? ¿Cómo?" They yelped in what felt like an infinite loop of gut noises people make under shock. "No, mamita, no," Gigi declared. I was upset and wanted to cry, but I had grown so accustomed to dynamics that disrespected me all my life. My mother used me an example of how she was a good person by how she raised me. She would scold and yell at me in public or tell weird stories like how she hid all the utensils in her home because she thought I was dirty. Mind you, I was 29 when she did that, and I had no clue until visiting her in Puerto Rico that that was her motive. I simply thought she was having another manic episode. "Te pueden arrestar," Gigi continued. In my head, I was jumping off the B of the Ponce sign, Chihuahua and all. They both were feeding off of each other where the theys came in and arrested me for training my Chihuahua to bark at Karens at dog-friendly restaurants. I just knew that they were imagining this big demise, and I felt hurt because my mother was definitely imagining with Gigi. I also knew that wherever Karen was, an angel was weeping, which was probably her sleep time music. And so I said, "Let them," I said in an act of rebellion rarely seen from me. To be honest, part of why my abuse lasted so long was not just that they trained me to believe it was not abuse, but that I also did not have their same fighting style. I did not like yelling or declaring openly I was going to put myself on suicide watch if someone forgot my Diet Coke from the grocery store. Yet even the strongest person has to push back. "Let them," I repeated. "Whoa! ¿Qué?" they said as their heads exploded. I was surprised, actually. They were so easily triggered that I thought they would have loved me intentionally doing it. No lo puedo creer, no lo puedo creer, Gigi promulgated, like a bullhorn in winter looking for a lost child. I'm tired, I said. I'm really tired. I don't want to talk about this for a 40-minute ride. Nothing happened, and I cannot be happy about it because something could have. Please, I said, annoyed, which pissed off my mother, whom she assumed Gigi found me disrespectful for not letting her disrespect me for the last 10 minutes of our ride. I mean, to be fair, we were almost home. My lips tightened, and so did my mother's. It was as if we both wanted to tell each other to go F ourselves. Yet my problem was Gigi had kids that were my age, and if my mother had to choose between scolding them or throwing herself off the B in the Ponce sign, that B was gonna be busy. All right, let's discuss. So we start off the story with when I was a kid, my mother went to go pick up my grandmother, and my mother and my grandmother are so similar. To be honest, in perspective, my mother is very much like her aunt, in that my mother's aunt was very volatile and volcanic, but she loved being fun and wise to the public. But privately, she was rageful, very, 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 very angry. And my grandmother could be angry too, but I think my grandmother had novelas and religion, so she had more distractions. And I really mean that. I think what killed my mother is the same thing that killed her aunt, which was they both, in the end, my aunt did nothing, like all day, nothing. Couldn't even read because her eyes went bad. Watched like Caso Cerrado, and my mother watches Judge Judy all day, so you could see the mirroring, and just would have these long-winded discussions about problems around the world, and just it was like no dreams, no goals, nothing, and But my mother would pick friends like her mom. And my grandmother always picked friends that had that weird frenemy, passive aggressive, I love you, I hate you. If you died tomorrow, I'd bring the most gorgeous bouquet to your grave, but I'm happy you're gone. Like this weird kind of, does anybody really like me? And I think that was the essence of our family. Our family, the adults raised the children to believe I could love you without liking you. And they passed on that dynamic from generation to generation. The problem is when you're raised by people that don't necessarily like you or don't necessarily know you enough to like you, inevitably you don't like yourself. And you raise your kids to compensate that dislike. And that's what I felt with my family. I like perfect example of that opening. My mom was weird with me, but not with the public, which is why I was always so insulted when somebody would say, give her a bad Yelp review in public about her public behavior. I was like, no, she's good. Wait till she gets back home. And it was just this really weird moment because you could tell. I'm there stuffing my face with cookies, just looking like, oh, snap, my mom is going to explode. And my mother took it, as she always did, and was really quiet. And then dropped off my grandmother and then went off about how this woman was a bitch and she was always rude to her. And it was a really terrible moment. And I thought it was incredibly mean towards my mother and incredibly mean that my grandmother didn't defend her or put a pause because of that same dynamic that we see throughout the story where my grandmother not once ever spoke about anybody's child, ever criticized them, even if she gave advice for their parent to pass on to them. It was so, like, ay, dile que se calme, que rece a Dios, que todo va a mejorar. It was so banal and gentle so as not to trigger or piss off someone. And here was this woman who was calling her child weird. And I kept on thinking of that moment because we went out to a restaurant, and obviously this would be decades later, right? We went out to a restaurant. I was visiting, and I had my dog with me, and my dog was lying down on the floor. And my dog is, first of all, it's a brown floor, and my dog is a white Chihuahua. He's not exactly missable. And I think the woman was just distracted, stepped on his tail, and he barked. And she yelled. And I guess she didn't see him, but nothing happened. So I thought, you know, I'm pissed that she stepped on my dog, but it was the tail. She got frightened. She walked away. Next thing I know, she reports it to the manager. And the manager just says, when you come back, can you bring a muzzle or something? And I'm like, I'm on vacation, so I'm not even coming back. This is a one-time restaurant deal, but sure. And my God, it was a 50-minute ride into hell. All right. We went right into Lucifer's asshole, honestly. And it was horrible because Gigi was going off about how I could get arrested, how they could remove the dog, how he needs training. And my mother was like, yeah, right. Yeah. And it was like a weird dog episode of Jerry Springer, where it was just so like, when people talk about, I don't know how to describe it. It was so, there's something so unattractive and so ungraceful to someone who hammers a point like it is Jesus on the cross, like just hammering, and saying the same thing. And what they don't realize is they are compensating with volume what they lack in virtue. So it was just this loud, and mind you, this car is not a bus. This is a 4-seat car. I think it actually shriveled into a raisin by the time we got to by the time we passed Ponce. And I was just so overwhelmed. And I was overwhelmed because these were two people that wanted me to feel bad, that wanted me to feel fear and worry, and not necessarily so I could go off and find resolution, because my mother was raised, I think my mother was raised to be unsuccessful, but her family didn't want to show it because my mother was the smartest of the family. She was definitely the one that was supposed to go big and didn't. And it was in part because I think her family really sabotaged her in every way. And one of the ways they sabotaged her was with this belief that if you worry a lot, you protect yourself more. If you worry a lot, you become more conscious of what you should and shouldn't do. And to be honest, it was because my mother was always worried she did nothing. It was because my mother was always scared that something could go wrong, she stayed in place. And she ended up really abused and battered by coworkers, friends, my father. And I hated it because, and yet she would say, obviously, I was the worst person that ever treated her. But I hated that moment because here my mother was joining Gigi in kind of targeting me and wanting to make me feel bad, just to make me feel bad. Not even to learn the lesson, to make me feel bad. And I know, because I've witnessed it my whole life, my mother never did that to other people's kids. And my mother would have never done that to Gigi's sons. She would have never gone out of her neck to say, that they don't know how to raise dogs, that they don't know how to raise children. And her sons are very successful. And this is, and in their dream life, he wanted to be a doctor, they became a doctor. He wanted to be a chef, he became a chef. And my mother doesn't see the correlation between her bad parenting and my bad choices. And I think we live in a time, a very tricky time, because there does come a point where your bad choices do become you, but they are rooted in bad parenting. And it's because I was about to repeat the same story that was my mother's. You take this super excellent, excelling child and you cut their self-esteem so much that they will literally allow you for 50 minutes to yell at them with all your friends about how your chihuahua got stepped on and reported on by a Karen who then let it go. Because that was the thing. It was done. Hallelujah. But I think, and this is what happens when you're raised in poverty too. I think there is this feeling of it's never okay. Even when it's okay, the lack mindset makes you think you're just waiting for it not to be okay. So the whole ride was now, he got stepped on, but now he's going to he's going to start stepping on people. He's going to be looking for Karens and stepping on them with his 1-inch paw. And watch out, Puerto Rico. And let me tell you something. I was looking at that P in Ponce really hard. I was ready to throw myself off of it because I was so upset that somebody wanted me to feel bad and that somebody had my mother on their side. And it would be a year from then that we would stop talking. But I think it was, when I look back at why my mother's relationship, why our relationship eventually ended, it was moments like this because what happened is I said, let them. And they went off. And I don't like that energy, that dynamic. And it's this weird moment where you feel really happy that you stood up for yourself, but also really disgusted that you had to, because it's almost like you have to become your enemy to defeat them in the moment, right? If they want to use knives, you got to use knives, or at least you got to use a weapon. And it was this moment of they were going to keep scolding me, unless I got arrogant and I got bold and I started, pues déjala, deja que me retan. Like unless I said something like that, I was going to basically, by the time we got back home, I would be yogurt. I would just be absolute cream melting out of the car. No identity, no feelings, nothing. And I hated, one of my biggest regrets in a lot of my toxic relationships is how they transformed me how they transformed me more negatively until I was able to heal enough to start transforming for the better. Because you do walk away angrier. You do walk away bitter. You do walk away humiliated. And you can't, I think what's really difficult about suffering from parental abuse is that the only person you want to comfort you is the very person that's destroying you. Like other people, if somebody was mean to them, they could go to mommy, they could go to daddy. I couldn't because my mommy and daddy were mean to me, and they would back each other by saying I was sensitive or that I was difficult or I didn't always pick up my own behaviors. And that moment was really impactful because my mother's friends had really successful children that went off to make their dreams while I was still struggling to even think I could dream. And it was that my mother, when I look back, she was always humiliating me, always announcing these lessons she was teaching me. And I remember telling my friend Josie, who comes up a lot, I almost forgot that my mother's friends had children. Because what if they mentioned their child? It was, obviously in praise or something they were doing, and very briefly. But it's one of the reasons I wanted to change, because I found myself, my mother only talks about me or her mom. She has no life beyond us. And that, how you cage yourself, it's like blaming the cage for why you caged you. I had no identity beyond my family. And they didn't mind erasing me. And this moment where you're allowing your friend to scold me was erasure for something that didn't even happen. It all turned out fine. Why didn't we celebrate? I'll never know. But check out daddyrecovery.com. Check out Hardin Music on all platforms. And I love you.